The room froze when Dan Sullivan silenced Jasmine Crockett for the third time. His voice thundered across the chamber, slicing through her words mid-sentence, as if her perspective was an inconvenience to be erased. The microphones crackled, his tone sharp, dripping with dismissal. And in that instant, every eye in the room turned, not toward him but toward her. Because Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply held her gaze steady, a calm that carried more weight than Sullivan's entire outburst. It wasn't just interruption, it was spectacle. He leaned forward, jabbing the air with his finger, voice growing louder, trying to reassert dominance through volume. But each time he cut her off, the arrogance became clearer. To some, it was just another senator trying to bulldoze a colleague. But to others, especially those watching from home, it was a familiar scene. A man in power attempting to drown out a voice that refused to bow. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Staffers shifted in their seats. Cameras zoomed closer. And on social media, the clips were already spreading like wildfire, audiences typing furiously. Did he really just do that? The contrast was impossible to miss. Sullivan's face, tight with impatience, contrasted with Crockett's composed stillness, her silence a shield stronger than his noise. And in that stillness, tension built like a coiled spring. You could feel the audience holding their breath, waiting to see if she would retreat, if she would swallow the insult and move on. But those who knew Jasmine Crockett's history knew better. This was a woman forged in courtrooms, trained to face down arrogance with facts sharper than any insult. She had seen louder men crumble when confronted with truth. At that moment, Sullivan thought he had won control of the stage. He mistook interruption for victory. What he did not realize was that every cutoff, every attempt to silence, only deepened the anticipation for what was coming. Because Crockett's voice was not gone, it was gathering strength. And when it finally returned, it would shake the chamber, leaving Dan Sullivan visibly rattled and a nation leaning closer to their screens, whispering the same question: what is she about to say next? The debate was never meant to be ordinary. The lights, the cameras, the sharpened questions, it all felt less like a congressional exchange and more like a trial with the entire nation as the jury. The stakes were immense. Policies that touched families' dinner tables, immigrants' dreams, and the dignity of millions were on display. Every word spoken carried the weight of representation. And in that high-pressure arena, silence and interruption became weapons just as sharp as arguments. Dan Sullivan knew the rules of this stage. For years, he had wielded his voice like a hammer, pounding down on opponents before they could even finish their thoughts. To him, dominance was not built on logic but on loudness. Colleagues whispered about his habit of cutting others short, his impatience dressed up as authority. It was a tactic as old as politics itself: speak over the other, drown them out, then claim the floor as your own. For too long it had worked. But this time, Sullivan had chosen the wrong opponent. Because Jasmine Crockett was not a woman who rattled easily. She understood the theater of power, the optics of arrogance, the way America's heartbeats quickened when they saw an underdog face down a bully. Sullivan's interruptions, though designed to silence, only amplified the suspense. Each time he shut her down, Crockett's silence grew more powerful, more intentional. It wasn't retreat, it was strategy. She was letting him play the villain without lifting a finger. The chamber itself seemed to feel it. Spectators shifted in their seats. Journalists scribbled notes faster than their hands could keep up, and the hum of phones vibrating in pockets hinted at the outside world already tuning in. On Twitter, hashtags were forming in real time. Let her speak, Sullivan vs. Crockett. Clips of his interruptions circulated within minutes, shared with captions that dripped with outrage. Viewers didn't just see a senator cutting off a representative. They saw every teacher, boss, or authority figure who had ever tried to silence them. And yet Crockett did not rush to speak over him. She didn't scramble for the mic. Instead, she held back, her expression calm, almost surgical in its restraint. Each pause she allowed made Sullivan look smaller, not stronger. He thought he was silencing her, but what he was really doing was writing his own downfall, word by impatient word. It was the kind of tension that television producers dream of, unscripted, raw, yet charged with symbolism. A powerful man unraveling in real time, and a poised woman waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The longer Sullivan dominated, the more the audience craved the inevitable reversal. Viewers at home had no idea that Crockett was about to deliver one of the sharpest takedowns ever seen on live television. They only felt the pull of anticipation, the collective inhale before the storm, because they knew, deep down, that silence like hers is never weakness. It is the quiet before a voice rises so clear, so undeniable, that no interruption in the world can drown it out. And when that moment came, it would not just be Sullivan's composure at risk. It would be his very image of authority, fractured under the weight of a truth he could neither mute nor escape. Dan Sullivan's career has always been built on a stage of authority. From the early days of his rise to political prominence, he cultivated an image of strength, decorated military background, firm handshake, the kind of politician who spoke with absolute certainty even when the ground beneath him was shaky. To his supporters, this confidence read as conviction, but to those who paid closer attention, the cracks were obvious. His confidence was less about clarity of vision, and more about the ability to drown out dissenting voices before they gained traction. Again and again, colleagues recalled moments when Sullivan used interruption as his signature move. In closed-door sessions, he was notorious for leaning over the table, breaking into others' speaking time, brushing aside nuance with a booming voice. To him, conversations were not about collaboration, they were about control. He thrived on disruption, believing that if he spoke fast enough, loud enough, and long enough, the substance of his arguments wouldn't matter. The performance of dominance was enough. But dominance has a way of corroding itself. For every person silenced, resentment brewed. For every moment he thought he had won by cutting someone off, he had also revealed an insecurity, that without interruption, his positions could not stand the weight of scrutiny. The louder he became, the weaker his foundation looked. Sullivan's arrogance wasn't confined to debate tactics. It showed up in his posture on issues, too. Critics pointed to his dismissiveness of immigrant struggles, his tendency to wave away concerns of marginalized communities as if they were distractions from real American priorities. His language often framed inclusion as inconvenience, progress as overreach. He projected certainty, but behind that certainty was a pattern of belittling voices that challenged his worldview. That dismissiveness became part of his brand. Some admired it, mistaking it for toughness. Others recognized it for what it was, fragility disguised as force. He believed he could bend reality by talking over it, and for a time, in the echo chambers of his allies, it worked. Yet politics is no longer confined to marble halls and polished floors. In the age of viral clips and instant replay, arrogance cannot be hidden behind procedure. Every grimace, every cutoff, every flash of irritation is magnified and broadcast to millions. And Dan Sullivan, a man used to controlling the room, suddenly found himself performing for an audience that was not impressed. This was the contradiction at the heart of Sullivan's persona. He positioned himself as a leader of unshakable strength, yet his strength relied on silencing others. He branded himself as a man of the people, yet he recoiled from the voices of those very people when they came from women, from immigrants, from anyone who challenged the old order he felt entitled to preserve. He spoke of tradition, but his tradition was one of interruption, not dialogue. And it was that very contradiction that would set the stage for his undoing, because in a debate against Jasmine Crockett, those tactics were not simply transparent, they were self-sabotaging. Every time he cut her off, he revealed exactly what he feared, that her words, if fully heard, carried more weight than his entire performance. For Sullivan, interruption was supposed to be the shield, but in the glare of the cameras, it became a mirror. Each loud interjection reflected his desperation, his inability to control a narrative without force. And as the interruptions piled up, the audience no longer saw a commanding senator. They saw a man scrambling to hold on to authority slipping through his fingers. The truth is, Sullivan's downfall was written long before the debate began. Years of arrogance, years of mistaking volume for vision, years of controlling rather than listening had prepared him for this moment. He stepped onto the stage convinced that his usual tactics would work once again. What he failed to see was that interruption can only silence for so long. Eventually, the voice you try to suppress becomes the one that echoes loudest. And for Dan Sullivan, that voice was about to belong to Jasmine Crockett. Before she ever set foot in the halls of Congress, Jasmine Crockett's story was already one of resistance and resilience. She did not emerge from privilege or entitlement, but from the lived reality of communities who knew too well what it meant to be silenced, sidelined, or told their struggles didn't matter. Her journey began not with fanfare, but with grit, a determination sharpened in classrooms, courtrooms, and neighborhoods that demanded a fighter who would not back down. As a young law student, Crockett carried more than her own ambitions. She carried the weight of representation. Every textbook, every lecture, every exam was not just a step toward a career, but a step toward a platform. She had seen firsthand how laws were used not as shields of justice, but as weapons of inequality, and she knew that if she wanted change, she had to learn how to dismantle those weapons from the inside. When she passed the bar, Crockett did not choose the lucrative path. She chose the hard one. She went into criminal defense, civil rights work, the kind of cases that rarely made headlines but defined lives. Her clients were not the powerful, they were the vulnerable, the ones who had been written off, pushed aside, or denied dignity. In crowded courtrooms where the odds leaned heavily against them, Crockett stood as their last line of defense. And it was in those very courtrooms that she built her signature style. Judges tried to hurry her, prosecutors tried to rattle her, but Crockett learned early that composure could be louder than shouting. She didn't match aggression with aggression. She let her opponents exhaust themselves with noise, then cut through it with facts delivered like a scalpel. Injustice was loud, but truth, when wielded with precision, always pierced through. That training followed her into politics. When she entered Congress, Crockett was no stranger to being underestimated. Some saw her as a newcomer, a disruptor, someone who didn't fit neatly into the polished mold of traditional Washington. But that was exactly why she resonated with so many. She did not walk into those chambers as a career politician. She walked in as a fighter who had spent years battling for voices ignored by the system. Her colleagues noticed the same thing her opponents once did in court. Crockett's resilience was unmatched. She absorbed attacks without flinching, letting the force of her silence unmask the insecurity of those trying to overpower her. And when she spoke not just for herself, but for millions watching who longed to hear their experiences validated. Crockett's background gave her something that men like Dan Sullivan could never manufacture: authenticity. She did not need to project toughness because she had lived it. She did not need to fake empathy because she had carried it into every case file, every speech, every fight for justice. Her poise was not an act. It was survival polished into power. And that authenticity made her dangerous to those who thrived on domination. A woman like Crockett could not be easily silenced because her voice did not rise from ego, it rose from necessity. Every interruption she endured reminded her of the countless clients interrupted by systems that refused to hear them. Every dismissive glance mirrored the same contempt she had fought in court. Each attempt to diminish her only confirmed why her presence was vital. It is why people began to see her as more than a politician. To immigrants who dreamed of belonging, to women who knew the sting of being talked over, to communities who had endured generations of being unheard, Jasmine Crockett became a mirror of hope. She was not just arguing policies. She was carrying forward a promise that dignity would no longer be negotiable. But heroes are not forged in comfort. They are revealed in conflict. And Crockett's resilience, while proven countless times in quieter battles, was about to be tested under a spotlight brighter than anything she had ever faced. Because, in a debate with Dan Sullivan, Interruption would not come from procedure or formality. It would come as open disrespect, repeated in front of millions. The nation would soon witness a clash not just of words, but of values, arrogance against dignity, noise against clarity, privilege against perseverance. And as the cameras rolled, Jasmine Crockett's years of grit and unshakable poise would be summoned for one defining confrontation. And that resilience was about to be tested on live TV in a way that left the nation stunned. The chamber was thick with tension as the debate reached its boiling point. What had begun as an exchange of ideas now devolved into a contest of volume. Dan Sullivan leaned forward in his chair, veins taut along his temples, his face flushed with frustration. Every time Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth to speak, he pounced, slicing through her words before they could take form. "You're missing the point," he barked, voice echoing against the walls. Crockett didn't flinch. She inhaled slowly, adjusted her notes, and tried again. "What I'm saying is—" No, you've got it all wrong," Sullivan interjected, louder this time, as if decibels alone could erase her clarity. Gasps rippled through the audience. Staffers exchanged nervous glances. The moderator raised a hand, half-heartedly calling for order, but Sullivan ignored it, plowing forward as though the stage belonged to him alone. For a moment, it seemed less like a debate and more like a monologue, punctuated only by Crockett's calm attempts to re-enter the conversation. And that calm was unnerving. Sullivan's voice climbed higher, his gestures sharper, but Crockett's silence cut deeper. She did not match his anger. She didn't roll her eyes or raise her tone. Instead, she waited, deliberate pauses lengthening like shadows stretching across the room. With every interruption, she let him reveal himself, not as strong but as desperate. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, transfixed. They recognized the scene all too well, a powerful man assuming that louder meant smarter, that force meant authority. But they also recognized something else, the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to play by his script. Crockett's composure became its own performance. When she finally managed to speak, her words were measured, clipped, precise. She didn't waste syllables. She made each one count. And though Sullivan tried to bulldoze her sentences, her pauses only magnified his bluster. The room itself seemed to take sides. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably at Sullivan's aggression, while others leaned forward, waiting for Crockett to break the silence with something undeniable. On social media, the clip spread faster. "This is embarrassing," one user tweeted. "Let her finish," another posted. "Why is he so afraid of her words?" The hashtags grew louder than Sullivan's interruptions. Still, he pressed on, mistaking domination for victory. His finger jabbed the air, his tone dripped with condescension, and his interruptions piled one atop another until his own argument blurred into incoherence. He thought he was silencing Crockett. What he didn't realize was that he was setting the stage for her. And Crockett knew it. Every pause she allowed, every calm breath she took, was a thread in the net she was weaving around him. The louder he became, the more ridiculous he looked. The quieter she remained, the stronger her presence grew. It was the art of patience, the discipline of someone who understood that timing was everything. The tension was unbearable now. The room felt suspended in a standoff between noise and restraint. Sullivan, red-faced and insistent, kept cutting in, certain that control was his. Crockett, poised and deliberate, held her ground without needing to shout. And then, just as the interruptions reached their peak, just as Sullivan's words began to collapse under the weight of their own aggression, Crockett's voice cut through, steady and sharp. But no one expected her next words to flip the entire room on its head. The silence stretched for a beat too long. Sullivan had just cut her off again, his words crashing like a cymbal through the chamber, but instead of rushing to reclaim the mic, Jasmine Crockett simply leaned back, her pen tapping once against the desk. The pause was unnerving. Viewers at home could feel it. The audience in the chamber could feel it. For the first time that evening, Sullivan's momentum faltered. his booming voice suddenly sounding like an echo bouncing back at him. Then Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm, measured, impossible to ignore. "Senator Sullivan," she began, her voice slicing through the noise with the precision of a scalpel, "I've given you the courtesy of finishing your thought over and over again. But I think the American people deserve better than interruptions. They deserve the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was not a shout, not a plea, but a statement of authority. Sullivan shifted in his chair, the color in his face deepening as Crockett continued, now unflinching. "You talk over me as if volume makes you right. But facts," she said, pausing deliberately, "don't need to shout." The line hung in the air like a gavel strike. The audience erupted with gasps, some breaking into applause before the moderator could quiet them. Sullivan attempted to interject. "That's not." But Crockett raised a single hand, not for silence, but as if she were conducting the rhythm of the room itself. The interruption died on his lips. Her composure was surgical now. She pulled out a folder of documents, flipping one open with crisp precision. "You want to talk about leadership? Let's look at your record." Her eyes never left him, her tone steady as she listed figures, quotes, and contradictions. Each point landed like a hammer. A vote cast against health care protections, a speech dismissing climate change while his own state battled its effects, a moment of grandstanding that fell apart under scrutiny. "Every time you cut me off, Senator, you're not silencing me," she continued. "You're silencing the people I represent, the single mother who can't afford insulin, the immigrant family who works 3 jobs and still faces discrimination, the young student who believes in a future you dismiss as impossible." The chamber stirred again, and Sullivan's composure visibly cracked. He leaned back, then forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk, his eyes darting toward the cameras as if searching for an escape route. The bluster that once filled the room was replaced with a strained silence. Crockett did not let up. Her timing was cinematic, letting his discomfort linger before driving in the next truth. "You believe that if you talk long enough, no one will notice the emptiness behind your words. But I notice, and so does every American watching tonight. They see a man who interrupts because he is afraid of what happens when others are finally heard." At that, the crowd could no longer contain itself. Applause broke out, punctuated by cheers that rolled across the chamber. The moderator attempted to restore order, but the moment had already slipped beyond control. Crockett's words were already trending online, clips spreading under captions like, "This is how you handle arrogance," and Crockett just ended him on live TV. Sullivan tried once more, his voice cracking slightly. This is political theater." But Crockett's reply came swift, devastating in its simplicity. "If it is theater, Senator, then tonight America just saw who plays the role of arrogance and who stands for truth." The eruption this time was impossible to contain. Viewers at home tweeted in real time, hashtags climbing, Crockett mic drop, truth over noise, let her speak. On TikTok, users looped her line, "Facts don't need to shout," over dramatic music, millions of views stacking up before the debate was even over. Sullivan's shoulders slumped as the weight of the moment settled in. His once commanding posture looked deflated, his interruptions now an admission of weakness rather than a show of strength. He shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar, his earlier arrogance unraveling thread by thread. Meanwhile, Crockett stood taller, not in volume but in presence. Her voice carried the steady rhythm of someone who had been here before, someone who had faced louder, crueler, and still emerged unbroken. Each sentence built upon the last, constructing a crescendo not of fury but of clarity. "This isn't about me," she said finally, her voice softening, "and it's not about you. It's about the people who put us here. They don't care who talks the loudest. They care who listens, who fights for their dignity, who remembers that power is borrowed, not owned." For a moment, the chamber fell silent, as if even the walls were listening. Sullivan's earlier interruptions seemed like distant noise compared to the resonance of Crockett's words. Her delivery wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a mirror held up to the nation, reflecting every time someone had been told to be quiet, every moment dignity had been dismissed as weakness. And in that reflection, millions of viewers recognized themselves. They saw validation, they saw justice, and they saw hope. By the time Crockett returned to her seat, the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Sullivan was no longer the commanding presence he imagined himself to be. He was the cautionary tale, undone not by shouting, but by the calm precision of truth. And Jasmine Crockett, without ever raising her voice, had delivered the kind of mic-drop moment that lives far beyond a single debate. But what happened after, the way her words ricocheted across the country, sparking conversations, igniting movements, and leaving commentators scrambling to capture the moment, was something no one could have predicted, and it was only just beginning. The debate might have ended when the cameras cut to commercial, but the story was only beginning. Within minutes, the internet had exploded into a frenzy. Twitter feeds lit up with clips of Jasmine Crockett's mic drop. The line "Facts don't need to shout" replayed endlessly, often overlaid with reaction gifs of fireworks, stunned faces, or the classic mic falling to the floor. Hashtags like Crockett mic drop, truth over noise, and let her speak climbed to the top of trending lists, not just in Washington, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. For many viewers, the debate was a late-night background noise, until that moment. Now it was must-see television. TikTok creators spliced her words with dramatic music, editing Sullivan's red face into memes that showed him shrinking smaller and smaller with every interruption. One viral video captioned, "This is how you dismantle arrogance," calmly, reached 1 million views within the hour. Cable news anchors scrambled to pivot their coverage. "The exchange everyone's talking about tonight," one commentator teased, rolling the clip again. Conservative networks tried to spin it. Crockett rehearsed this attack, but even they couldn't ignore the raw energy behind the moment. Progressive hosts celebrated it as a generational shift, a young, sharp Democrat exposing the frailties of an entrenched Republican senator. Late-night hosts wasted no time. By the next evening, monologues opened with jokes about Sullivan's repeated interruptions. One quipped, "Sullivan treated the debate like it was his Alexa. He thought he could just talk over it until it shut up." Unfortunately for him, Jasmine Crockett is not Alexa. Laughter roared across studios, and the punchline was shared endlessly online. Meanwhile, Sullivan himself seemed to vanish. His team canceled a scheduled morning show appearance. Local reporters noted that his office released no statement for nearly 24 hours, a silence more telling than any rebuttal. The senator who once leaned on bluster now appeared hesitant, retreating into the background as his political persona unraveled in real time. Crockett, by contrast, soared. Invitations poured in from national morning shows, podcasts, and panel discussions. In each appearance, she maintained the same poise she had on stage, deliberate, calm, unshaken. When asked about the viral moment, she brushed aside the theatrics. "It wasn't about a mic drop," she said. "It was about respect, respect for the truth and respect for the people I serve." That humility only amplified her resonance, casting her not as a partisan warrior, but as a principled advocate. The shockwaves went deeper than media cycles. Grassroots organizations began circulating fundraising emails with Crockett's words emblazoned across the header. Within days, her campaign reported record donations from small-dollar donors, many writing notes like, "Thank you for standing up for us." And finally, someone who won't be shouted down. Even beyond politics, her line entered pop culture. T-shirts appeared online reading, "Facts don't need to shout." A coffee mug design with her silhouette sold out in less than 48 hours. On Instagram, young activists captioned protest photos with her words, turning the moment into a slogan for resilience against dismissal and condescension. But the most profound shockwave was less visible: conversations at kitchen tables, classrooms, and offices across the country. People who had felt silenced in meetings, in households, in public life, suddenly had a touchstone. They replayed Crockett's calm defiance and found language for their own experiences. The moment became bigger than her. It became a metaphor. Meanwhile, Sullivan's image continued to shrink. Columnists compared his silence to a boxer knocked out in the ring, left slumped while the victor raised her arm. Editorials called it a turning point for the culture of interruptions in politics. Even members of his own party privately lamented how poorly he had handled himself. The more he tried to disappear, the larger Crockett's shadow loomed. And so the debate, which was meant to be just another skirmish in the ongoing partisan battles of Washington, transformed into a cultural earthquake. The nation wasn't just talking about policy points or who won on substance. They were talking about dignity, about voice, about the symbolic triumph of calm truth over arrogant noise. As one commentator put it, summing up the mood across millions of screens, Sullivan went in to dominate the stage, but Crockett, she walked out owning the story. And that story was still reverberating, reshaping not just reputations, but the very way Americans thought about power, respect, and who gets heard when the stakes are highest. In the end, what lingered wasn't the shouting, the interruptions, or the theatrics of a frustrated senator. What lingered was silence, the kind of silence that follows when truth cuts through the noise so cleanly, no rebuttal can be found. Jasmine Crockett had not just defended her right to speak, she had reminded the nation that dignity speaks louder than arrogance ever could. Her composure became its own kind of weapon, sharper than any insult Sullivan hurled across the stage. He sought to overpower, to dominate by volume, as if the measure of authority were the decibel of one's voice. But Crockett chose patience. She chose presence. And in doing so, she revealed the weakness behind his bluster. For every interruption, her steady calm was a mirror reflecting back his insecurity. The lesson resonated far beyond that debate hall. In offices, classrooms, and living rooms across America, people recognized themselves in her restraint. They had been interrupted. They had been silenced. They had been told in subtle and unsubtle ways that their voices mattered less. And watching Crockett stand firm, watching her pause, breathe, and then deliver a truth so undeniable it rattled her opponent, gave them a moment of validation. It was as if she was saying to them, "Your voice matters. Do not let arrogance drown it out." This was more than a debate performance. It was a parable about democracy itself. A system thrives not when the loudest voice prevails, but when the truest one does. In a time when politics is too often reduced to a shouting match, Crockett reminded America that patience can be radical, that calm can be revolutionary, and that justice does not shout, it endures. Her victory was not about humiliating Sullivan. It was about exposing the futility of domination without substance. His interruptions did not strengthen him, they revealed the fragility of his position. The louder he grew, the smaller he seemed. The calmer she stayed, the larger she loomed. That inversion, the arrogant shrinking while the dignified rise, was the moral heartbeat of the night. And so Crockett's words became more than a clapback. They became a civic lesson. They reminded us that democracy depends not on silencing opponents, but on hearing one another, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable. In her stillness, she embodied the kind of leadership people crave. Not flashy, not domineering, but principled, rooted, unshakable. For those who felt weary of the constant noise of political life, Crockett's moment was a breath of air, proof that dignity can still command a room. For those who doubted whether truth could survive in an age of spin, it was reassurance that truth doesn't need to shout. It simply needs someone brave enough to speak it. And as the echoes of that night spread, the lesson hardened into something bigger than politics. It became about respect, about the everyday courage of holding your ground, about the idea that power doesn't come from drowning others out, but from standing tall when someone tries to. The cameras may have turned off, the headlines may have shifted, but the image of Jasmine Crockett, calm, deliberate, and unbroken, endures. It is an image that whispers a timeless truth, In the contest between arrogance and dignity, arrogance may make the first noise, but dignity always makes the last impression. And that resilience, that quiet strength, was about to ripple even further, because Crockett's story was not just about a debate stage. It was about the future of a nation hungry for voices that cannot be silenced. Dan Sullivan walked onto that stage expecting to dominate with noise, but he walked off visibly shaken, undone by a woman who refused to be silenced. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to shout, didn't need to match arrogance with arrogance. Her calm command of truth was enough to leave the room, and the nation in awe. That is the story captured in this debate, not just a clash of words but a clash of values. One side believed power was interruption, the other proved real power is dignity, and in the end it was dignity that won. This moment wasn't about one senator and one representative. It was about us, about every person who has ever been cut off, dismissed, or underestimated. Watching Crockett stand her ground reminded millions that arrogance may rattle but courage steadies. That truth, spoken calmly, still carries further than noise ever will. And now the question becomes, how far will her words travel? That depends on us. If you believe voices like Jasmine Crockett's must never be silenced, share this video. Let it echo in the feeds, the group chats, the living rooms where people are waiting to feel seen. Subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter, the ones that cut through the noise with courage and clarity. And most of all, carry this lesson with you. Interruption may win a moment, but dignity wins the future. Because when history remembers this night, it won't remember the noise. It will remember the calm voice that left arrogance shaking. And together, we can make sure that voice is heard louder than every interruption.